Okay, we can start. So welcome to everyone and welcome to Nicolò Golinucci that is here with us today. So welcome, Nicolò.
Welcome, thank you for inviting me.
So Nicolò is a PhD researcher at the Politecnico di Milano. And in particular, his field of study is the industrial ecology. And today we'll have a talk with him about industrial ecology and how it's connected, for example, with the carbon pricing and also all the emission markets. So, Nicolò, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, which is extremely precise since I'm a PhD student and I'm working in the SESAM group, which is a group in the Department of Energy of Politecnico di Milano. And today we will try to, I would try to give you an idea of how the methodology that I'm using for my research can help us in understanding how the price of carbon and the behavior of the economic system are influenced. And so, just to show you a little bit the outline that I would like to cover with you, we'll first talk about carbon emission reduction and why it's relevant and why we are interested in doing this. And then we will move to why we think that putting a price on carbon can be a good idea. And after that, I would like to show you my research that started from my master thesis when I was a student in Politecnico di Milano, and then become a paper that was published in Applied Energy. And this paper is showing exactly an application of industrial ecology methodologies for understanding carbon pricing mechanisms. So let's move to the first part. And first of all, I will talk about what I call the hottest sustainability challenge, just to make stupid word jokes, because of course we know that increasing temperatures are an issue, and the containment of this increase, it's one of the most important challenges, and also one of the most debated challenges, since we see here in Europe that there is for sure a political momentum for at least talking about this kind of problems, and also not only talk about, but also some action. And so we see that Europe is leading in this kind of challenge. Nevertheless, also other countries are joining this challenge, the challenge of reducing emissions. We have seen very recently a statement from Japan, from Korea, and surprisingly, or maybe not for everyone, but importantly, also China is joining this kind of challenge through pledges. What are pledges? Are simply statements that in the next near future, carbon emission will be reduced. In the case of China, they are talking about 2060. In the case of the other countries, now we talk about 2050 for reaching the so-called climate neutrality. And but we may ask to ourselves, or at least I ask this to myself, why it's so relevant? Why we should focus on this kind of objective? And this map is very interestingly showing the all the studies that are conducted all around the world in the recent past for attributing the responsibility of extreme weather events. We know that this is not easy at all, since it's very hard to distinguish events that would have occurred anyhow, even without human activities, and other events that maybe were exacerbated by human activity, both in terms of intensity and frequency. that's a very nice map that I would like to show you very rapidly, since this website is, of course, online, like every other website. And here you can explore this kind of studies showing differences among, the finding is that human influence was found or not, or the kind of event. So for example, we can filter out heat and so on. I suggest you to have a look, because then you can have a very important base of literature to understand this kind of problem. But let's move back to our main objective. So we were just asking why it's relevant. That's why it's relevant, because the action of humans in many cases, and I want to stress this, in most of the cases that are here studied, have an influence on climate. So that should be important. And what's the magnitude of the problem? The second question that one may ask is, how big is this? We will try to show how big is this through what happened very recently with COVID-19. And a very recent paper by an industrial ecologist, which is this Manfred Lenzen, and of course the colleagues, tried to investigate the impact of the COVID-19. And the finding that was delivered in this paper is that we will probably see a reduction of 4.5% in carbon emission. This is very interesting, because it should be, that amount of reduction should be the reduction needed to meet this pathway, which is the pathway of staying below the increase of temperature of around 1.5 degrees. And that's really impressive to me, because this year was very difficult for all of us. And this should be the kind of reduction that we need to see every year if you want to meet this very important reduction objective. And these difficulties, it's here framed looking at another side of the story, which is the GDP. So the reduction of GDP that was more or less in the same order of magnitude of the reduction of CO2, of course. But to give you an idea, this is equivalent to take a slice of this pie out of the dimension of the German economy. So this gives the idea of the impact. We know that GDP is not the definitive measurement of human happiness, but it's very close to is probably at the moment the best approximation of this. And we know that it's not the only relevant number, but at the moment is gives us an idea of the magnitude of the challenge that we are trying to face. But again, one may tell, yes, but this shouldn't be the way in which we will reduce CO2, because of course we are not expecting to reduce the leisure and the transportation and all of what happened this year to reduce emission. This was a response to an epidemic. And of course, this represents a change in behavior that may be part of the solution for reducing greenhouse gases emissions. But we tend to think, and me as an engineer particularly, that technological change should be the first option, or at least the main mechanism on which we should focus for reducing emission. And what do I mean with this? And here I'm just reminding what I've just said, so that also behavioral change would be part of the solution. But with technology here, I refer to how inputs are transformed into outputs. And carbon emission intensity is an indication of this. So how do we calculate carbon emission intensity? We usually divide the amount of CO2 that was emitted within a certain jurisdiction, let's think about Italy, and we divide this by how much that economy produced in the same period. And we usually use GDP again. And this amount, this ratio is called carbon emission intensity. And if we can change, or we can, I don't know, fix this amount and we reduce this, we can reduce carbon emission intensity, which means at the end of the day, in this particular example, reduce absolute CO2 emission. And this is the chart of the carbon emission intensity for 4 jurisdictions. And I took China, USA, and Italy, and I also took world carbon emission intensity. We see, of course, a decrease in time, but this is not the only pattern, but 90% of the economies are reducing carbon emission intensities, and also China is doing this. And it's doing this very rapidly. And this was probably due to the denominator in the case of China, because he had a very important increase in the GDP output. And at the same time, frankly, recently, there were also some efforts in the numerator, so reducing CO2 emission. But how can we do this? How can we move from high carbon emission intensity to low carbon emission intensity? Again, technological change, which is not spontaneous. I put this, again, this picture just to make, again, another joke, to tell that a better and more efficient airplane is not coming out of a less efficient one. You need something that should bring the technology in a new and more efficient fashion. And I've put here 3 of the main, I think, strategies, or at least 3 drivers of technological change. And there are demand, investment, and policies, which are actually one influencing the other, as you can imagine. I put here something that is familiar to my background and very important for the future of carbon emission reduction. And this is the price of battery pack. And this picture is actually super fresh since I downloaded this morning, and is referring to 2020. And it's showing the impressive reduction of the cost of battery price within the last 10 years. We moved from value in 1,000 to a value in 100. And basically the price was reduced by, I don't know if you can read it, probably 90%. That's really, really impressive. How was this possible? This was possible mainly by a shift in some very relevant sector, let's say transportation in this case, and both the policies that were behind this change and the resulting increasingly high future demand. So in the future, there will be a lot of electric vehicles. Now it's very, very likely. And so a lot of companies are trying to take a part of this future demand by doing all in their possibilities to reduce the price, and so to take part of the market. And that was beneficial for having access to low price storage. That is very important for many applications. Think about electric vehicles, but also renewable power generation, because it can help in the stability of the grid and this kind of stuff. So, but we said a very important word. This very important word is policy. The role of policy, it's important. And that's why now we would like to talk about putting a price on carbon. I would like to start to describe this idea by the presentation of the scientific field that we call industrial ecology. What is industrial ecology? Basically, we can talk about industrial ecology in terms of the science that studies socioeconomic metabolism. Like our body, an economy has a metabolism. So there are inputs, outputs, and that body is in an environment and is using some resources of that environment and delivering emissions. These were not random words, because they're exactly what is happening in this kind of problem. So from one side, we have the social sphere of causation. So the sphere in which humans are interacting one with each other, and their social relation are determining, I don't know, the price of electricity through a mechanism of supply and demand and of markets. And from the other side, we have the biophysical sphere of causation, which is more stable in the sense that the amount of resources is not changing as quickly as our society. And it has its own rules and its own mechanism. And we are interacting, we as human beings, we are interacting with the natural environment every day, even if we don't want to. And in the case of the challenge that we are describing, what happened basically is that we found a very low source of energy for doing the activities that we are interested in, for fulfilling our needs. But these resources were also coming back in the natural environment in the form of emissions. And these emissions can be harmful and can have a long-term impact. That is why we should put a price on carbon. So we have an impact that is manifesting in the long term, and this kind of impact is not easy to be endogenized in the market. And if you put a price on carbon, you can include this aspect in the markets. And this kind of idea is really agreed within economists. This is a survey that was conducted in University of Chicago, and that it shows that economists, I'm not an economist, but I hear what they say. And in this kind of proposal, there are more or less the high rate of agreement, let's say. Yeah, agreement to put a price, but how do we know the fair price of carbon? It's not so easily to be determined. And here I reported a snapshot of a tool that we will see in a minute that is trying to catching this very complex interaction between long-term damages and today's actions. And in the case of this issue, we can see at least this number of drivers. The first one is called the shared socioeconomic pathways. Is basically how importantly we think that the economy will grow. And from the other side, we also have representative concentration pathways. That is also something that we can only estimate, and is related to, okay, the GDP will grow, so the economy will grow, but maybe the emission will decrease. That's possible. And that depends on how we will decide to invest in the next years. And so there are different pathways that can be conducted, and that will impact on the damage function assumed, because at the end of the day, the relation between the first two will determine an amount of CO2. And that amount of CO2 will determine a damage in the long term. That is very difficult to be computed, but there are some techniques. And also it's important to take into account that here, the value of time is very relevant, because we know that this kind of damages will occur in years. And so it is important if we care more about the future or the present. And we usually use a discounting parameter exactly for this. And this is influencing the analysis a lot. And then also there are issues of countries, because at some point of our globe, some degrees of temperature can also be beneficial. And that's the case of, I don't know, Canada and Russia in some of the scenarios that are year-round. That is the representation of this very nice tool. I suggest you to check it out. And this was made for a publication in Nature Climate Change, as I have written in the slide. And again, you can play with this very nice tool and show, for example, that if the damages are very high, there will be no countries with a negative social cost of carbon. So this is very hard. There are uncertainties, but we know that there are relations that are connected with future pathways of both GDP growth and CO2. So that was a point. And we did something actually, because we know that since many years ago, and someone tried to do something for this problem, and they decide to go for a carbon pricing policy. This is the map that is showing what happened so far. And we see that here we have Europe, that was the oldest, that is showing one of the oldest mechanisms of carbon pricing. But there are at least two ways of introducing a price of carbon. From one side, you can have a carbon tax. So you are directly taxing the production of something that is also releasing CO2 in this as a byproduct. And so you tax on the amount of CO2 that are expected for every euro of output of that sector, for example. That was what is going on right now in Sweden, where they have the highest price of carbon, that is in the around 110 euros per ton. And from the other side, we also have another mechanism that is called emission trading system. Emission trading system is, at the end of the day, you can imagine as a rule in which the total amount of CO2 that can be released within a certain jurisdiction, within a certain period, is fixed. And then there are allowances that have a market, and who wants to emit should have the allowance. And the price will be determined by the supply and demand. That is what is going on in Europe. And right now the price, it's 26. I was checking it while I was speaking to you. Before speaking to you today. Today is hitting a very high 32, actually not 26. You may think that is still low because you want to compare it, I don't know, with Sweden, but actually we are at the highest price of carbon in the emission trading system of Europe. That's what happened from the first allowance to today. And you can see that there was a very long period in which the price of carbon was very low. We can say everything, but it was very low. What do I mean with very low? I mean that this value was not influencing investment decisions or consumer preferences. And this tax is usually taking place together with other kind of axes and taxes. And so you cannot expect that if you have a very low price, you will influence decisions. And this is one of the first limits that I want to point out, because current pricing mechanisms have some limits. The first one is exactly this, so the low level of pricing. Take a look of this chart that was delivered by the European Environmental Agency, and look at Germany, United Kingdom, Poland, and Italy. You may see a little trend for some countries, okay, for Poland, I think no, of trend of emissions. These are the black one are the verified emission, and the columns are the production of electricity by year and sector, let's say, a source. And the only country that actually experienced a relevant decrease of emission is UK. Can you see this? And actually, if you take a look of what happened at the beginning of 2010, more or less, UK introduced a so-called carbon floor. So basically a minimum value for CO2 that was at the moment higher than most of the allowances. And that was a very important input for investments. And that helped in cleaning the carbon, the electricity mix. Of course, this is not, this is just something that I'm showing to you. It's actually not so easy to find the causal links between this kind of mechanism and the outputs, but researchers agree in this, that's what happened in UK. And the second limit that we can point out in carbon pricing mechanism are related to this chart. This chart was the chart that made me choose the very short career that I have so far, because I took a look at this Harvard Energy Technology Innovation Policy article that was showing the so-called carbon emission embedded in trade. So basically the products, basically the CO2 that was emitted for producing the product and then was going in another country. Take a look, this is China. China is delivering a lot of products for USA and Canada and for us as Europeans. And this is a very important part of the picture. If we think that 20% of emissions are embodied in trade, that's quite relevant. How can we deal with this kind of emission? There is something that is called carbon border adjustments. It is something that also Ursula von der Leyen included in her agenda. And actually they are very difficult to be implemented because at the end of the day, there are some technical issues and political aspects that are very, very relevant and important for this kind of problem. Think about what happened in 2019, referring to the trade war between China and USA. This is not going to be as hard as that, but will be, there will be an impact. So I know that there are some discussion right now in Europe, but it's not only on Europe decisions, because you need to take agreements with other countries and WTO and so on. The last aspect that is, again, another social aspect is related to who is going to impact. So the price on carbon will probably be even not detected by rich people because their life won't change, but the poorest part of the population will be probably impacted. And that's why economists, again, in their actual proposals, and these are the points that more or less we already discussed, they talk about an issue of fairness. So we should include a way to redistribute the dividends of what is collected by the policy. Actually, today there are also 28 Nobel laureate economists that are proposing this approach. So let's go to the last part. What did we do as a group and as a researcher? We try to use the so-called environmental input-output analysis. So environmental input-output analysis can help in addressing sustainability challenges, basically for two reasons. This approach is very comprehensive, which means that when you are looking at a specific sector, you are doing this while looking at all the other, because you need to have, again, a extended scope perspective. And the The other reason is that it's grounded on economic data. This kind of approach was born thanks to Leontiev, that also won the Nobel Prize for Economics, for economic analysis. So this may be a limit in certain application, but it's very important since we can detect all the transaction between different sectors in monetary terms, but then we can say, okay, probably also in physical terms, because there are a good relation between these two aspects. But what can we do with this tool? How many tons of CO2 could be allocated to different regions of the world? This is a question that we can try to ask with this approach. And we need inputs for this model. In particular, we need the detail on geography and the sector that we are choosing. And then we need information on the technology that are usually delivered in matrices that are somehow a table that is describing what you need for producing an output of every sector. And if you can do this and you select a category that maybe in our example may be CO2, you can have impacts. And so in our example, we will have region, and so we can think at an aggregated level, for example, for Europe, but we want to have China because it's very relevant. And we have USA, and we want again to ask to this question. So we care about CO2. So how can we allocate the responsibility for emissions? We have at least two approaches to answer to this question. So don't think there is also only one answer to this question. And here I'm showing the two main approaches that are used. From one side, we have the territorial, or also called production-based accounting, which is directly taking into account all the emissions that are taking place within the country. So think about China, that is producing for a lot of countries, a lot of people in the world. So their territorial emissions are very high. But what happens if you use another approach that is called consumption-based accounting? It happens that you are taking into account direct and indirect emissions that are taking place all over the world to produce what you consume. Okay, and if you have this perspective to evaluate China's emission, you will discount China's emission because a lot of emissions are produced for delivering product to other countries. We have seen it in the chart, the very complicated one that I showed previously, and we can see this also in this other chart. So the producer responsibilities including exported goods and the goods for domestic consumption, while the consumer responsibility is not taking account the export, that in the case of China are quite high, and but they're including imports. So for example, in our countries and our economies, we have a lot of imports because we want to use stuff from all over the world. And this is going to be more important for us. But so we see that there are no direct connection, if you think about it, to reducing CO2 emission in one country and necessarily have a reduction on global terms. We will see better here, but we need to see that there are supply chains that can be very interconnected in the modern globalized world that we have. And what can happen when you introduce a carbon policy which is affecting only part of the world is the so-called carbon leakage. Think about a policy that is impacting Europe production. And maybe what would happen is that you may have the so-called carbon leakage, which means that after you introduce the tax, the imports from outside are increasing, and maybe the same products are produced with a more carbon intensive economy. So there are more emissions at the end of the day that are going in the atmosphere with respect to the baseline. So this is something that may happen. And we wanted to investigate, that is the question that I asked to myself in the master thesis, what would happen if we move from a production-based accounting policy to a consumption-based accounting? Of course, we don't have another planet for making an experiment, and so we need to have a modeling approach. modeling approach that is based on the so-called world trade model. The world trade model is basically I'm taking input-output tables and I'm using it as an input for a linear optimization model that we will see. And the approach is so-called a comparative statics. What does it mean? It means that I'm trying to answer to the question, modeling a world in which from one day to the other, so overnight, we have a very important change. In this case is introducing the policy. So we have the baseline world and then we introduce the policy. From one moment, production-based accounting, and from the other moment, consumption-based accounting. And what are the degrees of freedom of the system? The system doesn't have the opportunity of a technological change. What I would like to assess with this exercise is only having a look on how production and importing patterns could change with the policy. We know, and we have talked about this, that technological change have an impact, but now I'm curious to see what would happen if we take a very important carbon emission reduction objective from one day to the other, and how the different paradigms can impact this decision. And what is regulating the model is the so-called comparative advantage. What does it mean? Is that we have a lot of regions that are producing the same products that are clustered in the same way. So, for example, if you think about this bottle of water can be produced by one country or another. The one that can produce the bottle of water at the lower cost is the one that starts to produce for the other. And when I have no plastic anymore, I cannot produce bottles for the others. So at that level, I will stop my production, and the second most convenient production will start. That's the idea. So we start from a model that is describing the world. So I take the database and I run the model and I found out a new planet, a model planet on which we can play. And how do we play? We play introducing policies. And every time we introduce a policy, we are going far from the optimization value that we had in the baseline. So in that example, we are minimizing the cost of production at the global level, but we want to satisfy the demand of people. And we don't want to reduce and bring to zero the resources. And production should be also positive. We cannot have negative values. And what happened is that if you take this approach with the production-based accounting, what you have is exactly carbon leakage. You see, because here I have the emissions that are reduced in Europe. When I impose to reduce, very importantly, the emission related to Europe. And okay, they are doing this, they are reducing the emission, but in other part of the world, the emissions are increased. And if you look at the black line, you see that on the global level, the emissions are increased. And that's not what you want when you put a carbon policy, because the global emissions are the ones that are affecting the climate change, not the local one. And you should focus on the global one. And that's what's happening with the consumption-based accounting. So the reduction of consumption-based emissions are resulting in a reduction of CO2 emission on a global level. That is true for Europe, which is a net carbon importer. That is not necessarily true for China, for example. But if we look at Europe and we take this approach, we see that CBA is not resulting in a carbon leakage phenomenon. These are the most disaggregated results, and we can go through it, but it's quite complicated. The only thing that I want to stress is that if we also look at the use of economic factors, the cost of the two policies are comparable. But what you should take always into account that, as I was showing in the previous chart, the use of economic factor are increasing because you are trying to do something that today is not discounted in the market, and you may be happy to pay for this. And that's the pay for this is represented by this black line, and is always increasing because you are introducing more and more restrictive carbon reduction policies. We can take minutes to talk about these results, but probably it's not the right place. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. These are my contacts, and you can write if you have question, and you can take question now if you have time and the possibility. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can also follow my group LinkedIn, where we post our research activities, which is the one of the SESAM group. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much, Nicolò, for your very insightful presentation. Take the chance to make questions also to Nicolò and answer functionality that you have in Zoom. We will have a round table after with the two speakers. So I suggest to proceed with the second speaker of the session and then give the floor for the discussion and round table after the second speaker. That is Alesso Pinzone. Alessio, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Alessio. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. And so Alessio will go a little bit in deep on also with what we see with Nicolò, that is the emission trading system. So Alessio, I give you the floor directly to introduce yourself and to go in with your presentation.
Yeah, well, I'm a civil engineer working actually in a company with a lot of CO2, that is Unite, and but some way I'm also active in an NGO that is focused on climate change and so on. Well, I think Nicolò made really a good presentation. So the main point of the ETS scheme and as well the carbon tax have been really represented in a clear way from him. What I may say is that it's really complicated subject. I analyze the carbon tax and the ETS scheme in different perspectives. And every time there was something that create a bottleneck in this system. So I'm not saying there is really a system that works. For example, let's focus for instance in the carbon tax. Let's make an example like for example, going with a car inside an historical center, and let's put a tax on all the vehicles that can go more than 50 kilometers per hour. So let's say that everybody that go more than 50 kilometers per hour had to pay a tax. So is it really the good way to reduce the speed in a historical center? It might be, but if you think that maybe I have a Ferrari that goes really fast and I have a lot of money, this is not the right way. I mean, it's not the way to think always. That rich people can do whatever they want and poor people cannot do whatever they want. So the main term and the main difficulties in this kind of system is where the tax arrive, or which is the subject tax, is the final consumer, or is the production side. So I think that most of all, the main issues is this. And if we are going to ETS scheme is something very interesting as a scheme, I must say, and it was studied in a quite proper way. The main problem is that a few countries were inside the scheme, and if we are talking about and thinking about China, for example, in the beginning when they didn't want to join it. So US, and if we think that this scheme was thought as a limitation in the production, I think, I mean, from an economist perspective, they were right. I mean, why they might reduce the production in a system where they are not forced to do that. The other way that was looking at that was a system in the middle. I mean, I'm not an expert of tax, so I cannot say that maybe my thought was right. I mean, the carbon tax help a lot. Some country like in South Africa, for example, we are seeing that the carbon tax that it has been applied to the carbon mines is going in a good direction. I mean, they are investing in renewable plants in order to reduce the carbon footprint and so on. So the beginning is always, I see in all the countries that has been applying is the right and the proper way. But in the long term, the people, I mean, find a way not to pay the taxes. There is a crisis, we cannot pay the taxes. I mean, the big companies all the time are also the company that I mean, have the strongest decision in an economical system. So the other point that I was looking at is the VAT system, for example. Everything that we have is with VAT, and actually we are not looking at this as a tax because the producer and the industrial, I mean, it's something that it's just something more that they are not paying itself. It's something that might increase the cost of the final consumption, the final goods. But in reality, the people are not looking at this like a real tax. But if we are thinking about systems similar to this in a production, this might simplify the system because I mean, the industrial company are not saying this as a tax, and moreover, all the cost will be applied to the final consumer that have the possibility to choose to the same good, maybe with the same cost and VAT higher than the other. I mean, this might be another scheme. We notice we make an experiment in a concept area in the north part of Milan, and we try to stimulate the people to reduce the carbon footprint during the concert. I mean, you have no idea how much rubbish during the concert. I mean, you can create people. I mean, drinking a lot of beer, having fun, and throwing the beer, I mean, on the ground. Nobody is thinking about recycling, and so in that situation, the carbon footprint is not in the idea of anybody. We try to convince the people, not forcing the way of living, but trying to give a reason why they might reduce the carbon footprint. First, with different approaches. The first one was giving them, for example, prizes. So giving a prize if they did something good, and I mean, so and we wanted to. We thought that this kind of approach was similar, like giving money to the people, and this approach it doesn't work properly. I mean, people were not reacting in the proper way, and they were not really interested to this. The second approach that we used was to trying to give good example. So try to explain to people that the carbon footprint was really a problem in the area, especially for an area they were going. Some people understood more than giving goods, but the results were quite low. The third point was giving a good example to follow. And a good example was the person and the artist that was singing during the concert. So the people knew that the singer was trying to reduce the carbon footprint. The singer applied to this scheme and make a video, and make a short speech at the beginning during this video. And we try, and this worked really a lot. So this explains us that the people are trying to reduce the carbon footprint, not only for the increase of the cost, and not only for the price or tax reduction that we might give to the people. I mean, this is something quite important in the economy. But we understood that the first point came from the good example we can give to the people, and the people need somebody to follow as a good example in this process. So with the example of the artist during the concert, we had really a huge reduction of, for example, use of plastic bottles during the concert. And if you can imagine that the water was free, the potable water was free, and a bottle of water cost like €1. So at the end, they save money, and they reduce the carbon footprint. So the reduce of water and the plastic bottle were really low. The increase of people coming from other places in bicycle, not using their own car, increase, and the rubbish and the plastic at the end was much lower than in the beginning. Of course, it depends. It's not always the same. When we the best case that we experiment was the mix between the price and the good example. So the best results we got when, for example, we asked the artist to give a T-shirt with a signature, and all the people that did something good during the event, they can register the good action, and they might win the T-shirt. So the experiment was pretty good, and we tried to propose the same experiment in huge company. That was really interesting to this. The main problem that we notice in huge company, really huge, with a lot of carbon footprint, was that everybody is quite interested to reduce the carbon footprint, but nobody is really aware what carbon footprint is and how to reduce it in a proper way. So we have two types of system in this moment. So we have the macroeconomy, where we have the carbon tax and the ETS, and we have the microeconomy, where we have the consumer. If we are only thinking to the macroeconomy, that is, of course, very important. Without helping the micro consumer, I think that probably the system would fail. Also in the opposite way, we cannot think to the microeconomy without implementing the macro economy as well. So what we try to do is to insert inside the company a kind of game, explain to people that every time that they do something good, they achieve a target or they achieve a kind of bonus endpoint. I mean, the good point were that we intend not to show who was the winner and who was the people that made more point than the other, because the system was thought like everybody that is doing one action, it was important. So it's not important that you do a lot of action. It's important that you participate in this game. And at the end, we discovered that, of course, there are people not at all interested to this, and there were people really active that were motivating some other people. But the good point is when we try to enforce the people that were motivating the other, the results were really, really interesting. So my idea from the TS scheme is it's more related to a system that is close to the VAT system more than a tax or than an ETS. This because I think that the company, the production company, should not pay really the taxes in the system, because it's easy for them to avoid the possibility to pay taxes somehow. It's really easy. The only person that cannot reduce the taxes to the goods so is the final consumer, and the final consumer is the one that decides. So if you think now, for example, for the big company in the oil and gas is now investing a lot of money in renewable, but why? I mean, nobody is forcing them to do that. But if you really think in reality, economy is forcing them, because the main shareholder, the main investor, and the main banks are not giving any more money to the company that are investing in carbon or in oil. So actually, the economy is pushing for this, and the big banks like World Bank and IC and so on are pushing to this kind of system. Moreover, the investor are pushing this. So I think that the right way to approach this scheme is not only to think into big consumer, but to apply the same system also to the minor consumer. From the ATS scheme, that is a scheme that I love actually, but the main point and the main bottleneck on this scheme, from my point of view, is the difficulties to get the carbon credit from a certification scheme. I mean, it's really complex. It takes a lot of time and huge investment in terms of studies and so on. So it's very complicated. It's not only a matter of money. I mean, how much is the cost of the CO2? But it's also a willingness to invest money, time, and so on in a process that is very, very complicated, that needs a lot of consultant to get this CO2 emission. But only the big company can apply to this. So at the end, I mean, we are going to the same point that it will be easier for the big company to get this, to reduce the CO2 emission through the scheme, but only because they are the only one that might invest in a process that is quite complicated. How to simplify this process? I mean, I really don't know. I tried to study an ETS scheme between some cities in Italy. I mean, we made an experiment of this, and it didn't work. It didn't work because at the end, I mean, the city were like discussing about the carbon footprint and so on. So, I mean, if we are thinking about only few cities, it doesn't work. But so, well, so my thought. I'm sorry for this. I mean, maybe I was not so linear as my colleague Nicolò in my speech, but I was trying to bring some example, some experiment that we made, and we tried to do. The only thing, the last thing that we did, and we tried to do that, is to create a kind of carbon emission scheme. I mean, of course, in a small term, using as well blockchain technology. I mean, the main thing that we thought is to reduce the cost and simplify the process to acquire carbon credit. In the beginning, it seems a good point and a good solution, because I mean, with this kind of system, everything is clear. You can track all the share between a good company and a bad company. The main issue is that how to decide how the number of credit I can give to a third party in order to share this credit between the various people is however decided by a third party. So we wrote actually a code inside the blockchain, so you can go over there, you can apply it, but in reality, it's always a third party, that in that case was me, that decide how to share those kind of carbon credits. So the main issue is why, I mean, how I decide this company have more credit than the others. So at the end, we discovered that it was not possible to have like a total independency on the decision how carbon credit can be exchanged. So our thought that we had in the beginning were completely wrong. My idea actually is that we need a central office that decide how to allocate the CO2 credit. It doesn't matter, I mean, if it's Europe or US or Japan. However, it should be really independent. But the main point is that all the procedures should be simplified, and to reach this, it requires a lot of work. In the other time, from the other perspective, of course, the way of working the macroeconomy is much more complicated and need a different strategy from the macroeconomy. So I think that there is not really a right process to follow up, and there is not the possibility to switch to the right process in really a short term. What I may say that there should be different strategies depending on what we want to reach, and in different level and with different people. I'm sorry not to bring you a solution. I have more doubts than solution in this scheme. And the only thing that I can really share with you it's what we try to do with our experiment that well, I think were pretty interesting. And at the end of everything, we noticed one thing, that the most reactive people, the most reactive subject in all this scheme that want to reduce the carbon footprint, but they don't know how to reduce, are the medium enterprise. So, and the people and the company that have a lot of impact in terms of social visuality and advertisement. I mean, I think that really to reach this is to create a system for the middle enterprise and help them to do something in order to motivate the big companies to reduce the carbon footprint. So we noticed that those kind of company like 1,000, 10,000 people working that really have really a huge interest in and approach us with a lot of interest. So this is our experience in this subject.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Thank you for also attending the Climate Social Forum. Now we have a brief round floor on the topic of the carbon market. So I invite also the participant eventually to join. But first to start, I would ask if the participant have some questions on the speech themselves. And to do that, I kindly ask to raise your hand. You can raise your hand by the Zoom button, and then I can give you the floor, or eventually you can write the questions in the chat. So if you want to ask something, you can raise your hand, and you will be given the floor. Even though I will start with a brief discussion between the two speakers. First of all, thanks for your presentation that has been very insightful on this topic that somehow is not simple, as we saw. There are several elements that are very technical, but I think that's important to have also awareness of this mechanism and know them, because they are shaping also the markets of the future. And properly on that, I would ask both of the speakers properly on this, how to communicate. Do you think is best to communicate these topics also to a wider audience? Because, for example, the full implementation of Article 6 of Paris Agreement, that will be a topic of the next session, will pass also with engagement of private sector and also civil society and so on. So it's important to understand also these concepts at a more distributed level, we can say. So the first question is on that. And so you can use the same order of your speech. So Nicolò and then Alessio.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think it's also partially related to a question that was delivered in the chat here that I tried to answer while I was speaking to the very interesting intervention of Alessio. That was related to how carbon pricing mechanisms are going to impact on employment, or at least if there are models or some insights on this. And I tried to answer by linking some articles that are out there that are, just to briefly answer to the question also here, at the end of the day, it's from the, let's say, modeling perspective and also from the literature, there are there is probably agreement in saying that carbon pricing are not destroying employment, are simply shifting people from one side, from one sector to a new sector. But it's there, at least from my point of view, from my experience, there are no evidence of very negative or of negative impact of carbon pricing in the employment. Actually, it's very difficult to understand the effects. So part of the reason is this, but also from an intuitive approach, what we are looking at in the what is happening now is that many sectors are shifting, so they are delivering the same kind of service, changing the mode of service. And this, I said this just to answer also to the question that was delivered in the chat, but to answer to your question, I think that out there are some very good websites where they are trying to summing up the evidence that is in the scientific literature. And for example, I suggest Carbon Brief, which is actually the website that of the first map that I showed in my presentation, because they are delivering very good, from my point of view, and accessible material for this kind of topics, because they are sometimes very complicated, very confusing. You see things like electric cars will be more harmful for the environment than a gasoline car. And it's not easy for a normal person to find a reliable source of information and a simple, or at least accessible source of information. There are, again, some examples that are very nice in English. So this one, and also the website that I posted to answer to the question that I was referring to. So I think these are part of the solution. So websites that have a divulgative approach, but they are written by scientific people. So people that are in the scientific debate. And I also think that videos like the one that we are now doing can help. I think that YouTube has a lot of potential for YouTube, and this kind of platform had really a lot of potential in engagement, in engaging people awareness on this kind of topics, because you can be more, you can have a higher rate of participation. There are many YouTube channels also in Italy that are talking about boring topics, or at least usually boring topics, and they can do this by engagement, with engagement for the people. And I think that this kind of tools are quite new for the scientific community, but they have a lot of potential in the divulgative scope. So yeah, I think this is the best, or at least the first step in the right direction.
Thank you, Nicolò. Alessio?
It's a strange question. I mean, usually I would say, yeah. I mean, of course, it's a business. I mean, it's going the right direction. There will be a lot of new jobs and so on. This is what I would say normally. But I will take also, an example that it was in my job. I mean, if we are talking about, for example, building a PV plant, okay. I mean, I need, let's say, for a large size PV plant, I need something like 1,000 people working on the construction side, and then I need, let's say, 10 people for the operation and maintenance. When I say this to a company like oil and gas, I mean, they were laughing at me, because I mean, they were bringing a lot of people and a lot of work, because they need a lot of people working on upstream and downstream activities for the construction. It's a huge number of people, and for the operation and maintenance, a huge number of people. So if we are talking about employment, I mean, and we are talking about numbers, I mean, the green economy is not so strong as the, let's say, gray economy. So I think it's a tricky question. It's like is it good to have a computer that is doing your job, or is just not the right approach? If somebody was asking me this question 30 years ago, I would be like, I would say, no, the human being and human approach is the correct way to do the right job. Now, I say most of the job, I mean, in the next year will never be the same and probably will disappear. So the approach of the people in the job is probably in the next 20 years, the people that are finishing the school probably will be forced to switch their job every 5 years in a different position, in a different roles. So I'm not saying that I will change the question in another perspective. We really need so many people working in a business that is creating I mean, something wrong for us, or we are working in order to create a better future for us and to live in a better way. I mean, maybe the question is not how many employment I can do in a sector, but how better the people can live with the new approach. I mean, why the people should work 40 hours per week and not 20 hours per week and have the same life. I mean, the green approach is not anymore the approach for creating all the employment. It's the way to create a welfare in the near future. So this is the main. Because if we are talking about numbers and employment, we will always be the weak part in this fight, because you will never reach the amount of people that an oil and gas company can bring to an investment. And in the same way, I know perfectly that the number of the people that will be employed in countries in Africa have a strong strength in the economy and as well in all the politician decision. So I mean, but if we are going to detail, I mean, the African approach is the old approach. Now the approach in Europe is completely different. So we are not looking to employment; we are looking to a better life. So I would say no. I mean, a green future needs less employment, and so the people have to invent new job to find a new employment.
Okay, thank you to both the speaker. We also raised some questions by the audience, but I will make the second question, and then we can have the space for the question of the public. The second question is about like the readiness of the markets, in your opinion, to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And you told both about the ETS and so on. And for example, in the last COP, one of the very important points that unfortunately was not reached properly was the implementation of Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement also as a mechanism to regulate all the emission tradings and so on. And what do you think about that? Improperly, I will explain better. Do you think that the current market structure could cope eventually the reduction of emission also at the base level, even if some lacks in the implementation of Paris Agreement?
Okay, this is actually a difficult one. since I had the opportunity to follow some of the discussion around possible evolution of the emission trading system. We know that is a market, but is also extremely regulated, and there are reasons for this, especially there were reasons for this at the introduction of the emission trading systems, and the mechanism didn't work perfect, probably is not perfect even now, and that's why they're trying to introduce some other mechanism within the emission trading system. I'm referring to what I also showed in the presentation. So the so-called border tax adjustment, and that is very difficult to be implemented. I had the opportunity to listen to Timmermans, that is basically the person that is in charge of implementing the new Green Deal. And then they were talking about at least, we are talking about 2-3 years to implement things like the border adjustments that, from my perspective, are very important for targeting the right, the thing that we really want to decrease, which are the global emissions. And if you are not able to track the supply chain, you may, and if you want to do this in a very strong way, I've tried to explain this in the presentation, you will run into more and more problems like this. You can run into the so-called carbon leakage. And I would like to talk about something that was introduced by Alessio today, because he was talking about the introduction of a different mechanism, and what we are trying to do as a research group, in particular, directly myself. I was asking to myself, what would be the practical implementation of the consumption-based accounting policy? And at the beginning, I thought that it was possible to do this at the European level, but as you are suggesting, there are a lot of difficulties in implementing this kind of strategies at this very high level. That's why, to answer to this question, so how a consumption-based mechanism could be practically put in place, I'm thinking, because I have just delivered a presentation last week exactly on this, a different mechanism that is targeting individual choices. And I think that is quite in line to what Alessio was proposing. And I strongly agree with this, because I think that at the end of the day, also right now, there are a lot of people, in the order of million people, that are concerned with carbon emission reduction. And if you can use this, growing momentum for this kind of sensitivities, you can do something that I think it can be more efficient than the market of emission trading system. But in order to do this, you need modern technologies such as blockchain, because I think that, and that is the proposal that I delivered and I presented the last week, you should engage all the actors in the supply chain of CO2 emission to have a good mechanism. And when I'm talking about the actors, I'm referring to who is producing the stuff and directly emitting as a byproduct of what you're demanding, the guy who is demand. So me and you, everybody who has a need that wants to be fulfilled. So the consumer at the end of the day. and who is going to pay? Because I think that is the part that is usually under evaluated over, yeah. And it's actually very difficult to understand who is going to pay, because the effects of climate change are very distributed in space and time. And we think that you should take an actor that is really paying for this. And at the moment, we think that insurance companies will be more and more concerned with climate change damages, because if they're going to occur more likely, they will probably going to pay more. So the mechanism that I'm proposing, it's connecting these people with blockchain. But what you need, and that is the difficult part, is to track the supply chain. And again, maybe I have no time to go in detail, but life cycle assessment, which is one of the methodologies of industrial ecology, can help us in tracking the CO2 emission of products. But then you have other difficulties. And so I think that individual carbon policies can be a solution. And I hope that we can do something in the future for this.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicolò. Alessio, to you.
Well, you ask a really complicated question. I mean, it's not really easy, and I don't have really an answer on this. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the Paris Agreement was really a fail, and I personally don't agree on the approach. For me, as we say, I mean, there is not a perfect scheme. There is only a scheme that we might try. We have to fail. We have to see which is our mistakes and then proceed on. I mean, even in the renewable energy, we commit a lot of big failing in the past and so on. Less mistake probably than in the conventional energy, I might say, with the chip 6. No, I really, it's something I really don't have the answer. It's too complicated to give an answer so in few minutes.
Okay, no worry. Thank you very much. I think that both the vision have given also the insight, also your answer, Alessio, has been given like the shape of the thing. We have to learn, and you have to make mistakes also to take the right model. It's like in the supply, in the like blockchain, also machine learning things that we will address also the second time. There is also like an adjustment through the error. So, okay, now I will give the floor for the response to the question that have been raised by the public. You can see them in the question and answer. And then we give the floor to one of our hosts that will be also in the next session, that is Stefania. I will greet. So there are two questions into the question and answer panel. The one is more a consideration. The big challenge will be making the shifting as less social painful as possible. And the second one is what to do with the countries whose GDP is heavily dependent of non-renewable energies. For example, Venezuela, Nigeria, and so on.
Yeah, I agree with the comment. And that's why I try to stress also in the presentation the need of redistributing the revenues that are collected by this kind of carbon pricing mechanism in order to not commit the same error that, for example, was made in France very recently. So to remember that people need will pay for their will pay with their stress and difficulties this kind of policies. We are doing this for a reason, but we have to redistribute the burden, and also to answer to questions like the one on the countries that are very dependent on fossil fuels at the end of the day. I think that in my best hopes, this kind of difficulties can be overcome with the same approach that I have just described, but at the global level. I know that is probably too optimistic to think, but if you think about some organization that can take into account the fact that a shift is needed, can help these kind of countries in moving out of businesses that are not that are less stronger than they were in the past. So, but again, this is very difficult, easy to say, very difficult to be done.
Alessio?
Well, the first one seems not really an question. The big challenge will be it's more a statement. Well, I don't agree on this statement. We discovered that the people and the soft approach, it doesn't work in climate change fight. I mean, everybody is happy to talk about this, but when it's the right time to do something, nobody is doing anything. So the approach should be strong and painful for everybody if we want to do something. I mean, there is nothing that can reach a target without paying from the people. I'm sorry, that's my fault. What to do with country with GDP is even independent? Force them to not to be dependent on fossil. So I can talk about Nigeria because I know Nigeria. I cannot talk about Venezuela, Indonesia. Nigeria, it's pretty easy for Nigeria to not to be so dependent from non-renewable energy sources. They have a lot of projects over there that have the possibility to be connected, but the state, after a first renewal mechanism, go a step behind and support the non-renewable. Why? Just because nobody is forcing that to switch in the green economy. So without forcing the countries, nobody is doing this. I mean, nobody wants to pay more the electricity or want to reduce a lot of employment in a country. This is the main reason why the people and the country has not switched into renewable. Now, if we are really talking the right, I mean, this is, I think, the right way, the right point, the right situation to say, the area say that renewable and in particular photovoltaic is the lowest cost for energy. So it makes no sense to say that there are countries heavily dependent on non-renewable energy. So it's just a decision they have to take. It's not anymore a matter of cost. The lowest cost is renewable right now, and not anymore the conventional energy.
Okay, thank you very much to both of the speakers for being on the panel and also for the roundtable. Now we have to go to the next session, but before doing the next session, we are like having very intense days these days in the Climate Social Forum. And so we think that also preparing for the weekend, that we'll have also very insightful tracks and very insightful speeches. Will be nice also to a little bit take a breath and rest. So there will be with us Stefania. That thank you for joining, Stefania.
Inviting me.
Stefania was also one of the interview people do on the add-ons of this track. We did several add-ons videos on this track because we say that it's a very also technical, and it's important also to have more contribution also offline. But for now, we take Stefania from another side, and she will read a lecture, so a text, and then she's inviting me as to do something. I don't want to discover nothing. And I left the floor to Stefania.
Thank you, Domenico. Such a pleasure to be here with you. I will be reading a short text that somehow we have already brought up during the day, during the first lockdown. And this is the second lockdown. So it makes sense somehow to bring it back because it gives emphasis to a kind of awakening of consciousness. Today we are at home isolated, but connected through the Climate Social Forum, connecting activists, stakeholders, fighters, citizens, and experts for the sake of the same mission, preserving our planet, improving as human race. COVID-19 has not come unexpectedly. Scientists and experts have warned since the 70s about the dramatic consequences of climate change. The pandemic is clearly showing us what life would be if we don't act seriously on climate change prevention, as we know that climate change will certainly cause more shocks and catastrophes. Yet, looking at how governments and people are acting towards climate change, I'm afraid that coronavirus is not bringing the reflection we would be hoping for. We hope people stranded at home would just ask themselves, how did we get to this point? What did we do wrong? We hope governments would act promptly and acting sustainable, innovative, intangible policies with social measurable impacts. We hope COVID-19 would mark the breaking point and finally the pandemic would just open up our eyes for the greedy and blind economic interests to stop prevailing over our health, which is the health of our planet. Our problem is not technology. Our problem is not policies. Our problem is us. We lack the will to change. We treat the world as we treat each other. We look lost as human race, as if there is a deficiency in values. We are in the middle of total chaos with lots of useless noise and contradictory measures from the governments. Everybody talking over each other. The economy has become a religion. Activities have to be imperatively generate profits. Products have to be replaced by new ones. The growth model urging developing countries to run after and reach developed countries took us to where we are today, which is unhealthy. We should rather dedicate time to silence, unplugging and disconnecting from what we have created, carving out quality time for ourselves, for our relationships and thinking. Time to silence for those who died because of COVID-19, silence for those who risk their lives every day to cure us and ensure food on our tables, silence for all the mistakes we've done, silence, reflection, awareness. This is the real vaccine. This is the antivirus. We are fighting off this virus thanks to competencies, knowledge and skills, the ability to analyze and act, connect and collaborate, relate and reorganize society. Reorganize society. We need to change production and consumption models, cultural and societal patterns. We need a mindset revolution from inside, with each other. Sobriety, solidarity, empathy, being over appearing. Let's dedicate some time to silence, a few minutes a day, a few hours a week to silence. That will bring lots of change, awareness and responsibilities. Equals over egos. Join us.
Okay. Thank you, Stefania, for
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
your message. And thank you for these minutes of silence, and thanks to all. I send in the chat the links to join the parallel session that are now. Now we are turning more into finance. And so please join the tracks and continue fostering in Climate Social Forum. Thank you very much for participating. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.